Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Dine Sports YouTube page and podcast network. We've got a great guest today. We're going to be sitting down with former OHL and U Sport player Matt Methot to talk about his journey through sports and hockey and sort of how he got from, just a young pup growing up in the Ottawa minor hockey system to some of the highest levels of the sport there. We also talk about lots of things that are transferable, to sports outside of hockey as well, too, because, a lot goes into becoming a student athlete, and Matt has definitely lived that journey in a variety of capacities as well too, right? Trying to juggle schoolwork while maintaining an OHL schedule, and then also attending classes at the university level and competing at the U Sport level as well there too. So definitely has some insights into how to make the most of that and some of the things that helped him along his journey there too. So real great episode. We hope you guys enjoy it. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Dine Sports YouTube page and podcast network. Joining us today, we have former OHL and U Sport player, Matt Methot. Matt, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Kyle. Thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to have you on board. And, now that you've got a little bit of downtime with the COVID, we figured, we got to get him on the podcast and talk a little puck.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, let's start right at the beginning here. How old were you when you first started playing hockey at an organized level? Not just out on the rink, but actually, lacing them up and putting the jersey on for a team.
I would say I was still pretty young. I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, actually, when I was thrown into my first pair of skates and actually set out and played with my brother's team. At the time, there was a few different age groups that were able to get together and play some hockey. So that was actually the first time we were playing organized hockey, and that would have been right here in the south end of Ottawa, out of the Jim Poplinski Arena, Walkley Arena.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you're sort of tagging along the older brother there, and
Yeah, and I'd like to think that I, out of all the success that my brother Mark has had, I think was a little younger when I first started playing because of that fact. We both started around the same time, and I'm 2 years younger than him, so I'll always be able to have that on him.
Yeah. There you go. You were first to the ice at a younger age there, right?
Exactly.
Right on. So every kid growing up sort of has that NHL player or that international player that they sort of look up to, and for me, I always looked up to Paul Kariya, and but for whatever reason, I was never a fast skater or a goal scorer. I was more of a Johan Franz and sit in front of the net and just score ugly goals there. But
yeah, absolutely.
was there someone that you modeled sort of your game after, or you looked up to when you were growing up?
Yeah, I would like to think that my idol back then, and probably still to this day, was Mario Lemieux. He was always a big forward that I always tried to model myself after. He was a natural goal scorer. Not that I ended up being much of a natural goal scorer, but he was certainly a guy that I thought he was always doing the right things. He had some hardships in his life, battling cancer and coming back and playing the game even after that. So to me, he was just a guy that I always liked to model myself after. I had all his rookie cards growing up. I think I still do somewhere in a box in my house. But he was always an idol of mine.
Right on. Well, hopefully you didn't stick too many of them in the spokes of your bicycle there, and you
Right?
dig them out and they're all bent and mangled there.
No, you know what? My old man actually made me put them in the plastic sleeves, a lot of the cards. So they've been pretty well preserved. So I don't know how much they'd be worth today, but that's probably something I'll have to check into in a few years from now.
Yeah. Well, you got some downtime, so you
That's
might.
true. Maybe I'll become a card dealer.
Yeah. Right on. So you kind of hit on it there as well too. You sort of always looked up to Mario Lemieux, but maybe your game didn't quite mirror his there. If you had to maybe pick a player who your game did sort of resemble more closely, who would that be?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I remember when I was playing junior hockey, going close to the draft time. So I probably would have been around 18 years old, 17, 18 years old. And a lot of the professional NHL scouts were actually asking players who were eligible for the draft what type of players they kind of emulated or played like. And at the time, I to be honest, I couldn't really find one. I was kind of a tall, gangly kid. I really hadn't gained as much weight as I wanted to at that point in my life. I didn't end up developing more as a hockey player later on, I think more into university or even to later years of my OHL career. But at the time I said Nick Antropov. Don't ask me why. Who the hell, wants to be Nick Antropov? And there's probably listeners here today. They're like, who the hell's Nick Antropov? But at the time that was a player. He was actually a tall player playing for the Leafs. I think he was a winger with Matt Sundin. But he, for whatever reason, I use that. And I remember, I can't remember the guy's real name, but he was a scout for the LA Kings at the time. And I remember he was helping assistant coach our team at the time. And I remember he was reviewing this piece of paper that had all these questions that the scouts wanted to know, and saw that was Nick Antropov was the guy that I said that I looked like. And he kind of looked at me being like, yeah, Matt, I think I would pick a different player than Nick Antropov. And anyways, so to this day, I don't know why I picked Nick Antropov, but if I had to emulate someone, I'd have to say it would have to be a power forward, someone who stands in front of the net, probably a Johan Franzen type of player. Again, I was never nearly the player that say a Mario Lemieux or a natural goal scorer would be. But name any power forward in the league nowadays, I would say I was probably closer to them. I had a pretty good shot, but nowhere near scoring 40 to 50 goals a year.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So Ottawa boy saying Nick Antropov of the Leafs.
Right? Bizarre.
Bold leap there, eh?
Yeah, maybe that's something we should edit out of this. I don't know.
Right on. Well, I mean, obviously parents and family members play a huge role in your development growing up. But if we sort of put them aside, was there anyone who was, could be a coach, a teacher, anything like that, anyone who played, a key role in your development growing up and sort of helped you along in your hockey journey?
Well, to be honest, and I'd like to pick someone outside of the family, but within our family, I would say we had the closest support. So I didn't have an agent, and I'm sure there's a lot of kids out there that are moving through the ranks, whether it be football, basketball, whatever, that may not have representation and haven't even crossed that bridge yet. And I shouldn't say unfortunately, because there are players that move on in all careers and all different sports that don't have representation. But I didn't have an agent. So negotiating my Ontario Hockey League contract and kind of guiding me through that process was my father. He was very fortunate to have gone through that with my brother, Mark. Now, Mark had representation, but I didn't. So all that to say, having my brother and my dad around me during those key periods in my, semi-professional career was huge. They were able to give me some insight into what to expect. And some of the things that I can do to be better and to end up being successful. So I would have to say my brother and my dad were probably the big two figures that really helped me through my career and navigating that process. Because I can't really say that there was anyone better than that outside of those two.
Yeah, fair enough. And, is there maybe one particular piece of advice that you got from back in the day that they gave you that you still go back to today or you still remember fondly? Or
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because I always go back to, looking at the differences between me and Mark. Because I, ended up going to school and he ended up playing professional hockey, I tried to see if there was a different mindset that we both had going into this process. And I think that I was always kind of pushed to maybe have a backup plan in terms of going to school. And so was that the difference in terms of not moving on and playing professional? I don't want to say it is. I mean, part of it is a little luck. You need to be in the right place at the right time. Obviously, you need to have the skill to back it up. But for me, I would say is always have a backup plan, or at least when in speaking about education, always have a plan in terms of going to school. That wasn't really something that I thought about much playing in the Ontario Hockey League, right? You're playing in front of thousands of fans. You're just thinking about making it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's certainly something you should pursue. And you should be trying to squeeze that orange to the last drop. But always have it something in the back of your mind in terms of maybe preparing yourself for school or potentially thinking about a different career in case sports doesn't become the end all for you. It's important to have something that you're still passionate about, but that you can plan for as well. And I was very fortunate that my dad kind of always guided me towards school. When I was playing in the Ontario Hockey League, I was taking college courses in Barrie at Georgian College. And then when I came back to Ottawa, I took a couple courses at Algonquin College. And then I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit in more detail later, but I ended up moving on and playing 4 years at Ottawa U with the hockey team there. So I think it's important to have that there just in case.
Yeah, yeah, and solid advice for any walk of life is you got to
Mhm.
always have a plan B, C, D,
Yeah.
E, and keep your options open. So I mean,
Yeah.
you hit on it as well there too. So you played with both Barrie and Ottawa, but let's sort of rewind to heading into your first OHL experience there.
Mhm.
What was going through your mind heading into your first training camp at the OHL
Mhm.
level there?
Well, it's an eye opener, right? You're going in, you're a boy, and you're going to play amongst men, and that's the reality of it. I'm not shy to say that I developed later on in life in terms of gaining all that muscle and whatnot, and so you're going in as a 170 pound, and I was still fairly big for my age, to be honest with you. I was about 6'1", I think 175, maybe going into my first training camp. And well, needless to say, I got tossed around everywhere, right? You have guys that are there that are over 200 pounds, that are 6'3", and that have been playing the league for 2 or 3 years, right? Some of them NHL draft picks. So it was a big eye opener for me. You're away from home, you're out of your comfort zone. You're on a scheduled pace. You're doing a lot of fitness stuff that, in hindsight, I wish I would have prepared a lot more. I wish I would have worked out a lot more going into that first training camp. But hey, that's in the past, and you learn from it. And um, I would say that the following training camp, I came, in shape, and I came prepared. And it was just so happened that it was that summer that I really started to put on weight and more muscle. And I was fortunate in that sense. I came back at camp about 215, and I was about essentially 6'3", 6'2", 6'3". So I had a pretty significant training summer that summer, and I came back ready. But it's certainly an eye opener, especially for anybody going into that position. And again, any sport, it's going to be a wake up call for you. But you got to take what you can from that experience and apply it to the next opportunity that you have, and that's kind of what I did. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just it. And we're speaking to a wide variety of athletes, and
Mhm.
that seems to be sort of the common sentiment there. Is when you're jumping from one level to the next, you're
Mhm.
going from being probably the biggest, fastest, strongest player on your local team to, well, guess
Yep.
what? Everyone that's on this team now was that
Yep.
biggest, fastest, strongest kid, right?
Yep.
So it's a huge, huge
Exactly.
adjustment, right?
Yeah, and it does play with your mind, right? There's a big psychological thing to that as well. Like you just say, right? In your mind, you think you're the cream of the crop, and then you get humbled pretty quick. And you can kind of take it in two ways, right? You can say, "Oh man, like I don't know if this is for me," and I wouldn't say that was a thought that I really dwelled on too much, but it comes across your mind, right? Is this really something that I'm ready for and that I can continue to do? Or you take the other option and you say, you know what? I'm going to take this as a learning opportunity. I'm going to make sure that I'm better than every other player the next time I get back here. And that was kind of the mindset I had, and that's an option everybody has, right? It's you got to come back confident in your own abilities, and you just got to make sure that you give it all you can.
Yeah, yeah, and being in that elite level environment there, you don't have a lot of your normal support systems, right? The teammates you've been playing with for maybe 8+ years, the
Yep.
coaches, your
Yep.
family, you're away from home, all of that. Was there any maybe advice that whether it came from a coach or a veteran player on that team that they gave to you that sort of helped with that adjustment of not having your normal support systems there and adjusting to that next level?
Yeah, well, I would say your teammates are going to be first and foremost the biggest supports you have. And my advice for anybody is to reach out to those teammates. It could be a little intimidating going into those situations, being the rookie that goes up to the veterans and asks for help. But the game has changed so much, like in the last 10, 15 years, where the biggest part of that camaraderie was, at thought at the time would be through hazing and that kind of stuff, and that just doesn't happen anymore. That's not what it's about, and the leagues are in all sports have come down really hard on that stuff. So the game has really changed in that sense, where at least in my opinion, I think that your teammates would be the most approachable people to come to, and they're not. I mean, to me, if your teammates won't give you any of that information or won't be welcoming to you coming up and asking for support, then that, those aren't good teammates. So, but I would say, yeah, reach out to your teammates. Those are probably the best supports to get you through that. Again, in terms of my experience, I was very fortunate that I had my brother and my dad who've gone through that experience with my brother before, and they were able to kind of give me a bit of a heads up in terms of what to expect and how to be more comfortable entering those situations. But to be honest, there's not too much that will get you ready for it. I think you can be given all this information and then you're dropped right into it. And it's just like, wow, it's a different experience. And going through a semi-professional camp is going to be new. And it's a pretty cool experience to go through. And you kind of need that anyways to learn. Right. So, yeah, there's not too much that can prepare you for it, but just remain, like I said before, you remain confident and use those close supports that you do have, whether it be family or friends or teammates. And those are the people that are going to get you through it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking of new experiences there, everyone always remembers their first. When you've scored your first OHL goal, walk us through what's going through your mind there.
So, yeah, that's, I haven't had to bring that one up in 3 years. I'm pretty sure I still have the DVD because I asked for it through the media station at the time. I think it was Kojiko or whoever it was in Barrie. But anyways, it was a home game in Barrie. We were playing Sudbury. We were already shellacking them. I think it was like at the time 6-2 or something like that. It was a third period goal. I was coming down for whatever reason on the right side. I was a left winger, but I was coming down on my off wing, coming down the right wing. I kind of had a defenseman. I'm pretty sure there's still a defenseman there, but he'd given me some room to walk into the top of the circle, and I let a wrister go, and it was a low blocker. And to me, it was like, wow, it was an amazing goal. I was so excited. It was probably about within the first 5 to 10 games of the season. At the time, I mean, should I have celebrated and whatnot to make it 7-2? Probably not. But you know what? It's your first OHL goal, and I think everybody understood that. But the arms went up, and I couldn't have been happier. And I didn't have too many goals that year. I think I only had 8 in my first year. But I also had to step into a bit more of a minor role. I think I was usually a fourth line player there for the most part of the year. But all that to say, it was a memorable one, and I was lucky to have got a DVD with it. So I'd have to find it, but it was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool experience to get your first goal in front of, I think Barrie held about 5,500, I think, in that arena, and it was a sold out affair. So it was pretty cool.
Right on. Well, I mean, as nice as it would have been to have been an overtime winner there, you gotta have to temper the celebrations down.
The expectations down, yeah, exactly.
Right on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you played, what, a season and a half with Barrie? 2 seasons?
Yeah, played a season and a half with Barrie, and then I got traded at the deadline in my second year, and was fortunate to come back to Ottawa. That was certainly an interesting experience, having to be traded when you're not asking to be traded. I'm sure there's a lot of kids out there that are probably going to go through that situation at some point in their careers. At first you're heartbroken, but you learn after that most teams are all alike. We're all athletes. We're all fairly welcoming when it comes to meeting new players and whatnot. And I was very fortunate that when I came to Ottawa, the players were great, and I was coming back to my hometown. So it was amazing to be able to play in front of friends and family for another year and a half, and have some success here in Ottawa.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to get traded, it's kind of a silver lining coming back home, and suddenly
100%. Yeah.
And everyone, family, friends can sort of come down and watch and share in that journey.
Yeah. It could have been worse, right? Could have went to Owen Sound. Not knocking any of the Owen Sound people out there, but there's a lot of different teams, even in the States, that wouldn't have been as nice as coming home. So it was great to come back to Ottawa, and like I said, playing playing for an organization. I played under Brian Kilray in his last few years that he had here as the head coach of the 67s, and it was an amazing experience here. A first-class organization. They really took good care of their players. We didn't have the most success. We were about a 500 club while I was here. But no, it was amazing being able to play in front of, nine or what are they? Yeah, they're about 9,000, I think, when they're packed up in the old Civic Center, now Lansdowne. But playing in front of all those people here in your hometown, that's certainly a dream come true. Anything short of playing for the Ottawa Senators, right? So.
Yeah. And so when you did sort of, find out that you, got traded to Ottawa and you're getting set with your new team and all that, you'd mentioned you were sort of obviously rookie season, fourth line and probably moving up to third line in that second year and all that there.
Yep.
Did you get asked at all to change your game, moving from, let's say, a checking forward to more of a scorer or vice versa or anything like that? Or did they essentially say, like, just keep doing what you're doing? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an important fact for a lot of people, or a lot of players, I should say, that are moving through their careers in sport, and that's defining what role they want to play to their team. Because the reality is, and I'll use hockey as an example for now, right? I mean, there's not many hockey players out there that can fill every single role that there is out there, and be the best at all of them. You at one point in your career, especially once you get to the semi-pro to pro level, you have to define, well, in my opinion, you have to really define a role that you're going to take moving forward into the different teams that you move into. And with me, as I kind of mentioned before, when I was saying who I would kind of emulate as a player, I was a power forward. I was a big player. I'm 6'3". At one point, I was about playing weight about 215. So I was tasked with going into the corners, standing in front of the net, taking the shots, because I was one of the bigger guys. And unfortunately, with being one of the bigger guys, you're also chased by the other bigger guys. Listen, I'm not going to lie. I could handle myself, but I wasn't a fighter. But in those circumstances, you're called out by other guys because you're the biggest guy in your team. But to answer your question directly, yeah, I was starting as a power forward in my first year, playing more on the fourth line. I started getting delegated more roles. I was able to sub in with players like Brian Little, who was on the first line that we had in Barrie there as a young lad. And I was able, but in those roles, it was more, I had to stand in front of the net, right? Let the other guys, create some room for them. And that was kind of my role. And then moving into, to be honest, my role never really changed moving forward. I just had more of an opportunity on the ice to show what I could do. And so moving forward, I just continued to do that role. I had more ice time. I was able to get myself into more positions to shoot, which would lead to more goals. Creating your own space, that would also allow for other people to get opportunities as well. So, my role never really changed that much throughout my career in playing junior hockey. I wouldn't say that I became more of, I think, an asset when I was playing at the university level. That's when I think my career really started. I really started to understand where and what role I have on a team and how best I could use my abilities to help the team.
Yeah, and it's perfect segue to sort of the next part of this is you almost had sort of two, not necessarily separate, but sort of two careers.
Yeah.
You had your OHL and then your U Sport career as well too,
Yep.
right? So you went on to play for Ottawa U men's hockey program there, and what would you say are some of the biggest differences from the OHL sort of model to the U Sport model?
Yeah, I would say the speed was pretty comparable. I had a few people saying, it was faster, it was slower. But I would say it's just the guys were older, right? So you feel like you're coming into a rookie season again, which you are. I would say the guys were much bigger and they were much older, right? So now you have guys who they're not teens anymore. When you're playing in the Ontario Hockey League, you only have 3 overagers per team, so 3 20-year-olds per team. Whereas you move into this university sport level, and now all your guys are in their mid-20s. So, and they've all had years of training under their belts, and they're all, for the most part, they're all in great shape. So, It was, I wouldn't say the speed was too different. It wasn't much different, but certainly the guys were a bit bigger. Um, but yeah, I would say that was the big difference. I found that's when I kind of came into my own. After the few years that I played a hockey, I kind of had to make that decision whether or not I was going to, try and go through a professional tryout somewhere, whether it's in North America or overseas, or like I said before, you go the education route and go to school. And I was very fortunate at the time, and I don't know if things have changed, but at the time, the Ontario Hockey League paid for a year of school for every year that you played. So I was able to start off right away with 3 years of school paid for, and that's books and tuition. So that was huge. Like, that's a big incentive, right? And the general rule of thumb is, as soon as you play one professional game, you lose your school package. So I really had to make a decision. It wasn't really something that I can flip flop on. Yes, I could have, I guess, started playing school, and then if I decided it wasn't for me, I could have flopped. But I really wanted to make up my mind and follow through with the original decision that I wanted to make. So at the time, like I said, I didn't really have representation. So even if I wanted to play professional hockey, I would have had to have done a lot of the legwork myself, or had maybe a representative of the team, the coach or an assistant coach, kind of do some fishing for me in terms of trying to find someone who might want me. But I was still young, so. And it wasn't until after the fact, and I played years of university, that I realized that a lot of those teams overseas are looking for you to have a little more experience before you join over. I don't think there's too many, players from the OHL that are making that direct professional transition overseas. At least I know a few will go down and play in the East Coast Hockey League in the States, and if they're lucky enough, land onto an American Hockey League team. But anyways, it was I made the decision to go to university and capitalize on that 3 years of tuition and books. As we all know, it's not cheap to go to school nowadays, and I'm sure that still acts as a barrier for many kids out there that want to go that route. But I decided, I think, that I was better off doing that. And going back to what we were talking about before, and having that plan B. Law enforcement was always something that I had the back in my mind, and I always wanted to keep that in mind in terms of what education I would need, or that would make me competitive enough to land a career in that after my schooling was done. So that was always in the back of my mind, which leads me to also joining the criminology program at Ottawa U when I was there. That was the program that I had chosen. So yeah, going into university was a bit of a big transition for me, just because I took a few college courses, as I had mentioned before, when I was playing in the OHL. But going to university and learning how to study, and to me, I wasn't a scholar. I'm man enough to admit that I wasn't a very um, um, education was. It was always important to me, but I was never. There was obviously some subjects that I wasn't the great at, and hockey was always number one for me. And now that had to flip, right? Anybody going to university, you have to make your education first, or you're just not going to succeed. It's not going to how it works. Yeah, I had to kind of wrap my head around that, and start to learn how to be a student, essentially, again, a full-time student. And that was an adjustment for me. And it wasn't, to be honest, until I would say my second, third year of university that I was really able to learn how to be successful in university, and juggling school and hockey and a social life and a job, because those were all things that I did at once at one point. And that's not easy for, a young teenager. Now, I wasn't a teenager. I was a little older, because I had played hockey in the Ontario Hockey League. I didn't join and play university hockey until I was in my earlier 20s. So I kind of had that advantage, that I had a little more life experience, but it's not easy for anybody. So all that to say, it was a pretty big transition, but I had, like I said, a wonderful 4 years at Ottawa U. I was very privileged to be able to act as the team's captain for 3 of those years, and really help build a program that we never made it to a national championship, but we had a lot of fun. And we played against some great hockey players that did move on to play professional hockey elsewhere after their school was done. And at one point, I was very fortunate that I played on the top producing line in Canada at one point. And that was the same year that I was very lucky enough to play for Team Canada during the FISU games, and they were being held in Turkey that year. So a lot of good times there.
Yeah,
And
lots
I'm
of
happy to elaborate a bit.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, looking back on it now, obviously a big part of what you were just hitting on is the student athlete life, right? You gotta have that education as such a core competency in what you're doing. And when you were going through your OHL career, like you were saying, it's part high school, you were doing some reach ahead college courses and all of that, but there was a lot more travel. There was a lot more, just games in the season. So there's a lot more going into that. So maybe a bit of a lesser sort of educational workload, but more demands on the athletic side. You get to university, all of a sudden these university level courses are the professor's not going to chase you to hand in an assignment. If
They
you
don't
hand
care.
it in, you get a 0 on it, right? So,
Yep.
so there's a lot more importance on that. But your seasons are a little bit shorter, right? You're in OUA, so you're not traveling to states or anything like that. So looking back on the two, do you find that one was easier than the other, whether it was the OHL or the U Sport level, in terms of finding that balance as a student athlete there?
Yeah, I think because it wasn't so busy, like when you're playing in the Ontario Hockey League, like I said before, like hockey was really your only main concern, and that's all you really had to focus about. I did well in my college courses, but they weren't front and center to what I really wanted to do when I was there. And like you say, it flips though. Once you get to university, like you say, the teachers aren't really there to support you. If anybody there, listening to us right now, I'm sure knows, and that are going to university, right? They're not chasing you to get your papers in, they're not going to try and hold your hand when you go and write an exam. So it certainly was a big transition, in that has to flip. Now, I will say that when I was playing university hockey, though, it was very helpful. Like you say, we were very busy. We always had 2 games on the weekends at least. And then we had practice every day during the week. And then you have to fit in studying between there. And so it was challenging having to study for exams and write papers when you're on a bus trip all weekend. And then, like I said before, you're still also juggling, your social life, you're juggling work, and a whole list of other responsibilities in there. But I find that because you have all that, you have to kind of schedule and structure your days, and that helps you, at least it did with me, to plan when I had to study. Obviously, that takes a little responsibility out of you. You have to plan that. But I found that was I started to become more successful when I planned. Say, practice was from 1 to 4, and then I had class at 7. So between 4 and 7, I would say, okay, I'm going to the library. And so I would have my schedule of the whole month and all the times that I knew that I had a few hours where I can study and whatnot. And because I had that kind of schedule and that regiment, I think that really helped me get my bearings and kind of make sure that I was doing all the work that I needed to, and to be successful in doing that work. But it's definitely a big transition, and anybody out there moving towards going to school full time, I would urge you to just make sure that school comes number one. And you may get pressure from coaches and this and that once in a while to make sure that you're at practice and whatnot. But listen, at the end of the day, your education should be the most important thing you're worrying about. And to me, if you're taking that serious and you're making sure that you're scheduling, your study times and making sure you're doing well, the rest will kind of follow suit. And I just find that being a good student coincides with being a good athlete, and both of them coincide together.
Yeah, yeah. And part of what you were saying before too there, you quickly touched on it there. In your later years at university, you got selected to represent Team Canada at the World University Games and all that there. And for those that are listening right now and might not be familiar that there even is a university sort of world championships that go on, in a nutshell, what were the games? How did you get selected for that? How did that whole process sort of come about?
Yeah, it was quite the whirlwind, and I, like you right now, and probably many other people out there, I had no idea what these games were, even leading up to that year where I went to the tournament, because it just wasn't something I really thought. Like I knew about the World Juniors and the Olympics, but that was the extent of my knowledge when it came to international play for hockey and whatnot. Um, so that year, I actually wasn't even selected to go to the main tryout camp. Now, for hockey, how it works every 3 years. So there's three university sport leagues in Canada. There's the West. I can't remember what it's called. There's the OUA, which is in Ontario, and then you have what's it called? The is it the Atlantic? There's an Atlantic, league where all these universities play in as well. And every 3 years, it rotates in terms of what league will create a team that will go and represent Canada at the games. And it just so happened the year that I went, it was the OUA that were making this quote unquote all-star team to play as Team Canada and go across the pond there to play in the FISU games. And essentially, the FISU games are just it's like the Olympics, but for university students. The year, I think it was my third year of university. So 2011 was the tournament, and OUA got selected to make this team, and I wasn't actually on the list to even go to the tryouts to this team, which, to be honest with me, hurt me. Like I said before, that was the same year that we had the best line in Canada. I was one of the top scorers in the OUA that year. So I don't know why I wasn't selected to go, but I didn't dwell on it. We were having a pretty successful season. I was worrying about my own team here in Ottawa, and I didn't think too much of it. And then the tournament went by. They actually played a few games against the World Junior team because the tryouts matched the World Junior tryouts as well. And I believe that they tied or they only lost by one. So that just goes to show you the quality hockey that is there. They are very likely would have beat any other World Junior team at the time. But obviously Canada had a good team. I can't remember who was playing on Team Canada that year, but they would have probably, I'm sure, had a stacked team as they do every year. So anyways, the tryouts went by, the team was selected, and then I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks before the team was going to go, there were a few injuries happened to a couple key players. And instead of going back to the training camp roster that they had, for whatever reason, I guess I matched a better role for the team than someone else on that training camp. Or I don't know if there's political decisions there, as we all know can happen in sports, but I got a call saying, Matt, we'd really like you to have to come and join the team. So at first I'm like, yeah, that would be great. But now I had to come up with a couple $1,000 to go and join this tournament overseas. And I didn't have that money. I'm like any other student out there. So I was very fortunate. My coach at the time, Dave Leger, he essentially said, no, Matt, you're going, and we'll take care of it from our end. So I don't know how he scraped the money, whether it was through scholarships or whatnot, through, the different programs at Ottawa U, but he managed to make it happen for me, and I'll always thank him for that. And I gave it the green light, and I joined the team. I met them at Pearson Airport in Toronto, and there we were heading to Turkey, Erzurum, Turkey, which is essentially a little town close to the border of, I believe it's Iraq or Iran, but it's in the Middle East. And it was an amazing experience. Very humbling to see how that part of the world, I heard a rumor that the town of Erzurum essentially built a massive complex for skiing and for hockey just for this tournament. So it was pretty amazing to see how this town that essentially had nothing came and built all these different structures for the games. And it was an amazing experience. They had an opening ceremonies like the Olympics do with thousands of people and fans, and obviously athletes from all around the world coming together and competing. And it was amazing. It was a great experience. We ended up losing to, who was it? Belarus, I think, in the bronze medal game. or in the silver medal game, I guess it was. I can't remember now. I think it was Belarus. Anyways, and we played Russia. A funny story about that, though, was the Russian team. So we had on our team, we had players, from obviously different programs and cities across Ontario and even Quebec, at all different levels in terms of or years of study in different subjects. But and those were always listed on the programs for the players on the team. But when we played Russia, the entire Russian roster was all in the first year in a physical education program. So it just goes to show, we don't know how legit that was. I think a couple guys on our team actually did the research and read that some of the players were actually playing in the KHL, which is essentially the NHL in Russia, for all those out there that are listening that may not know the leagues that we're talking about. So it was a little sketchy in that sense, but I like to, we did pretty well against them. I think we only lost by 1 or 2 goals. So I was pretty happy with our, with the results that we had against some of these teams that had great players on them, and players that probably shouldn't have been there. But anyways, I'm not going to delve too much into that, in the political side of things. We had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. It was an experience of a lifetime. I have my Canada, I have the white Team Canada jersey hanging in my loft in my house with my bronze medal. It was an amazing experience. I wouldn't trade it at all for anything. And if you ever have the opportunity out there for anybody listening to go and represent your country, it's truly amazing.
Yeah. And, for a lot of kids growing up playing hockey, they watch the Olympics, they watch the World Juniors, might be World Cup of Hockey, whatever it is there, right? For a lot of them, that is an ultimate dream, right? Putting on that Team Canada jersey and hitting the ice representing your country, right? It was a bit of a surreal moment when you walked into the locker room the first time, and in your stall, there's Methot across the back of a Team Canada jersey.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I was hoping to end up getting the red jersey, because the red, to me, it's like, I don't think there's anything more Canadian than the red Team Canada jersey. But all that to say, it was pretty surreal going in there and seeing your name. I was wearing sporting number 22, I believe it was. It was pretty cool. And to be amongst a lot of those players, too, that were on that team that were playing for different teams in Ontario, I had played against in the OHL. Not too many guys, I think, from that team moved on to playing professional hockey, to the NHL caliber, but a lot of them were the best players on their Ontario Hockey League teams at one point. And so it was pretty cool to talk to a lot of those guys about the experiences we all had in the OHL, and to kind of come back together and share in that moment.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking back on your playing career as an entirety, from, Timbits all the way up to, graduating from Ottawa U, are there 1 or 2 moments that maybe stick out more than the rest?
I would have to say one of, I think, my favorite moments was when I was playing in Ottawa, and it was the first time we played Barrie in Ottawa. So Barrie would have been the team that I was traded from, and Ottawa was the team that I was playing in. And that game, I believe I had 2 goals and including the game winner, and we won that game. And they had a great team. They ended up, I think, moving to the conference finals that year. So that was an awesome experience. It's kind of, proving your old coaches and management that they should have kept you. And like I said, I had an amazing experience in Barrie. I would have liked to have stayed there. And now I don't regret what happened, because I came back to Ottawa and I had some success in Ottawa. But certainly it was a feel-good moment, being able to kind of stick it to them, kind of thing. Apart from that, obviously the Team Canada moment, playing university hockey was a big one for me. And I was very unfortunate in the fact that I've never won a league championship in my life playing hockey, and I played for, since, like I said, 4 years old, and played organized hockey until I was 25 or whatever it was, until 2012. And I never won a league championship. I won tournaments here and there, far and in between, but you know what? There's a lot of people out there that, in my opinion, may take that for granted. And still to this day, that's one thing I regret. I never won a league championship. So any of you guys listening out there that in your respective sports that have won a league championship, cherish those moments and just know that you'll never forget them, because that's one thing that if I could turn back time, it would have been awesome to have that opportunity to win a league championship. And I never got that opportunity. I think the closest I ever got was to playing in the conference finals in my first year in Barrie. We played Peterborough, and I think we lost in 5 or 6 games. And that was the closest I ever got. Apart from that, I think I played a Boxing Day tournament in Junior B when I was playing for the Campbell 73s. And I think we won the Boxing Day championship that they have every year. But that would have been the closest I got. So, yeah.
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride, eh?
Exactly. But yeah, that's certainly one thing I wish I had the experience that I never got.
Yeah. And, for those that are listening right now who they might be either heading into maybe their draft year, they might be looking to try and get on the radar of some scouts at the U Sport level, whatever it is that they're trying to get to that sort of next level. What advice would you give to them to really help them, stand out and distance themselves from the competition and maybe turn some heads there? Are there any things that you would, advise them doing, whether it's training wise or just, game wise or anything like that, to get themselves noticed a little bit more?
We'll start off with what you just said. Training is huge. And I touched on this earlier when I was going into my first training camp in Barrie, and I wasn't prepared. And I don't know if I was a little naive. You may go into these things thinking that you're already the best, but you have to go into it knowing that other people are probably going to be better than you. But you can't control what they do. You can't control what other people are doing in terms of their training or their own professional development for the game. All you can focus on is what you do. And we always use a saying that, in games and whatnot, is just be better than the player across from you. And that's all you can really control is what you do. So work your butt off is what I have to say. If you're tired, keep pushing through that. There's a lot of people that are going to be in your position that may be working a bit harder than you. So what can you do to make sure that you're better than they are? And now, like I said, if I can go back in time, that would have been one of the things that I would have pushed myself more, and that would have been my physical conditioning. Moving into it, and it's such a small window. And the other point that I was going to touch on was, don't necessarily leave things like drafts and don't think that that's the end all, because I was a 9th round pick out of 15 rounds to the Barrie Colts. And out of those 15 rounds, there's only 2 of us that ended up playing for Barrie, from what I understand. It was Brian Little and me. And Brian Little ended up going to the NHL. I didn't, but you know what? I made that team. And that just goes to show, out of 15 rounds, only 2 of us played for that team. So don't let drafts and whatnot be the end all. There's a lot of players out there that end up being walk-ons because they were able to turn some heads, and that end up having great careers in whatever sports. So don't be discouraged by drafts. It's hard sometimes because you may be seeing some of your peers getting drafted and getting some of these opportunities, but use that as motivation. And use that as that fuel to become a better player, and use it as a way to evaluate yourself. You're, as I said before, there's always gonna be players out there that are similar to you, or maybe a little bit better than you. And a draft sometimes is a way of being able to compare yourself to those players, and to understand what else you can do to maybe become a better player. But certainly don't get discouraged because of it. That's a message I want to tell to everybody out there listening, because you'll drive yourself crazy about that. It's not worth it. You can't control what other scouts do in terms of what they're looking for, and what they're looking to bring to their own teams. All you can focus on is, as I said before, as we both discussed, identify what your role is. Try and emulate maybe some of the players out there that are playing those roles, and try and figure out how you can make yourself a better player, to any team looking for that role amongst them. But yeah, I would say training is the big one. If you can start early and get on the same page, and training is a lot different than what we used to do. Like, God, we would go into training camps and it would just be max squats, max bench, max this, and it just wasn't. Training has changed a lot. And I'm a dinosaur when it comes to training now. Like if you look at all the, the young NHL players that are emerging in that league right now, the training is so different. It's all based on speed. Yeah, you have to be strong, but being fast in any league right now, I think is the top thing. Because yeah, leagues are changing and training is becoming much more efficient, and it's changed as a whole from when I grew. So I'd be lost if you had to say, Matt, go out there and tell this kid what to do. I wouldn't know where to start, because I would probably be training him to lift lots of weight. But I'm smart enough to know that's not the case anymore. So, but it's a lot of these leagues are based on speed now, and you can't change necessarily your height, right? You can maybe change your weight a little bit here and there, but if you can be the fast, and an example that I have is we had a kid on our team when I played in Barrie. He must have been 5'6", 5'7". He was like a water bug style player. Maybe 150 pounds. Like, he was a small kid, but let me tell you, he was fast, and he was able to avoid all the big players because he was fast. And he was a kid that I remember looking at him coming into camp, and I'm like, this kid's not going to last. He's going to get hurt. And you know what? He was strong, don't get me wrong, but he was small, but he was quick, and nobody can catch him. So I don't know if that's a comparable example to what's going on today, but I would say speed is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, number one, thank you so much for, taking the time to actually join us today and sharing your journey there. But for those that are listening who, might want to, find out more about sort of your journey, or whether it's the Ottawa U men's hockey program or anything like that, where can people find you, or where can people learn more about, the similar clubs that you've worked your way through?
Well, I'm not too active on social media anymore. The best way, geez, that's a good question. If you wanted to get a hold of me, you'd probably have to get a hold of you first. And then anyways, I have social media though. I'm out there, and if anybody does have any questions though for me in terms of development, I can always send you my email. And like I said, I'd love to help anybody out when it comes to these types of decisions, and what they feel is the next steps for them, and how I could support those decisions and give you a little bit of guidance. But I can drop you my email, and you can have it distributed amongst the masses, if you will. And I'd be happy to help anybody who is going through this, period in their life where they're looking to play semi-professional hockey, or any sport for that matter, and that are just looking for a few tips in terms of where to go in terms of education and making all those big decisions, because they are big, and it's nice to have people around that can support you through those times.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You said you didn't have representation when you were a little bit younger there. I'll be your representation for getting your information out there for anyone who's listening who wants to get hold of it.
Exactly. Well, and you're right. Like, there's a lot of unknowns, right? And anybody going into this that may feel alone, you're already at a disadvantage, right? If you don't have someone to kind of help you out through those decisions. And as I said, I was very fortunate that I had two people that had just, my dad and my brother, that had just gone through that experience. So I was fortunate. And, everybody should have someone there to kind of guide them through that process. And I know that you are a good reference for all those youth out there that are looking to find their way, and just having all these different personalities kind of join you on your podcast, I'm sure is helping guide everybody in the right direction. And there's a lot of good resources there. And as I kind of filtered through some of the people that you've had, it seems like you have a lot of diversity in terms of different sports and different routes that people have gone. So it's definitely a good resource to have, to pour over some of these podcasts, just to see what everybody's doing, and the different paths that people are taking moving through the sports world. So
right on. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hope you and the little one and the wife are staying healthy, and hopefully we can see everyone back on, whether it's a rink or a field or a baseball diamond or something, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me there, Kyle.
Right on. And that's a wrap for another episode of the Dine Sports YouTube page and podcast network. Massive thank you goes out to Matt Methot for sitting down with us and walking us through his journey in hockey and some of the things he learned along the way, some of the tips and tricks that he put into his athletic development as well too. And hopefully that resonates with some of the other athletes out there who are listening, whether you are in hockey or not. A lot of those skills are definitely transferable and applicable to many areas in life there. So if you haven't already, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. We've also got various social media accounts that we'd love to interact with you guys on there as well too. So check those out if you want to stay up to date with all the latest developments. And we've got some more great guests coming up later this week. Stay tuned.